Hello everyone, I'm Slate3K. I'm a content creator here on YouTube as well as Twitch. I typically build detailed North American cities, and today I'm collaborating with Paradox Interactive to talk about urban transitions, those spaces between your downtown skyline and other parts of your city like suburbs or industrial parks. While that skyline may be the most important feature of your city or the thing that catches the most attention, the surrounding areas can be equally as valuable to making your city look realistic. So let's talk about some ways you can transition away from your downtown. First, I want to talk about the fade, the transition in terms of height from skyscrapers down to buildings that are only a couple stories high. Now, there are times where you have a little bit more of an urgent drop-off in building height. This could be like a geographic feature, something like a river running through your downtown or a coastline. But otherwise, if I'm moving towards different parts of the city, I want a progression downward in terms of building size as we leave the center of downtown. So if your skyscrapers are high density zoning, you want to start limiting how many units you zone with each building that you're trying to place. By zoning smaller areas, you'll get smaller or shorter buildings, allowing you to taper the height of buildings as you leave the downtown area. And while you're doing this, you can also mix in medium density buildings, which naturally aren't going to be as tall, and it's also going to give you some diversity in the building selection as you're tapering off building height. So while this is a pretty simple city block, we've mixed two different types of residential densities, and we've made it so that you can see a little bit of tapering in terms of the building height. There's two other types of zones that I tend to lean on for these areas, and that is high density commercial and my personal favorite, mixed use. Typically, your high density businesses are not going to be that tall, nor are your mixed use buildings. Your skyscrapers are largely going to be made up of unique buildings, high density residential, and high density offices. So these other types of zones are largely going to help build out your city so that it's not all just skyscrapers and you have plenty of stuff in your city to make it unique. Not to mention, mixed use buildings and some of the high density commercial buildings are great for corners. And of course, with these, you can mix in medium density residential to fill up your city block. So with just a few more buildings placed, you can start to see how this develops. We've made a mini downtown featuring some skyscrapers towards the back right with a few smaller buildings on the front left. This is a pretty compact example. I also don't mind that there's a couple buildings that maybe stand taller amongst some of the others. I think this gives your skyline a little bit of personality. So now that we have some ideas around what you can zone for your middle density areas, let's talk a little bit about how you can really set it apart from your downtown. While we know that typically North American cities are built on a grid system, these transitional areas of middle density can be a really good chance to change the direction and shift how things are laid out. And there's a couple really easy ways to go about that. First, I'm going to lay out a grid, and let's say this is our downtown area. Using the grid tool along with some overlap, I can align a couple intersections and create a new grid facing a different direction. And with the bulldozer, we can do some cleanup, getting rid of some of the roads that feel maybe less necessary. Now you can see we've broken the original grid we started with. This is going to make your city have a little more depth and seem more dynamic, especially when it starts to fill in with buildings. We'll use the new grid to set up roads around the original grid. This will give us that transitional area that we can then zone and build off of using some of the tips that I talked about before, and you can create your transition away from your downtown. This is one simple way to go about it. Let me show you one other way to break the original grid. We'll start with our grid for our downtown. And in this case, instead of building a grid attached to this, I'm actually going to use a larger road. Not only does this road break the grid that we had, we also can utilize it for a little bit more traffic flow. Utilizing a road like this can also help you set up the new area at a specific angle that you want. Then we can expand off of that using the grid tool to continue this new set of grids in a different direction. And of course, you can always expand from here, incorporating more organic lines and curves to further differentiate this part of the city from your downtown. Doing this can also give you some unique shaped city blocks, which allow you to incorporate vegetation, maybe parks or green space. And that brings me to my next point, which is density. And I don't mean zoning density, I mean how closely packed are the buildings in this area. So while green space or parks is certainly an option to help spread out some of the buildings, to sort of counter the density of downtown, you can also use parking lots, low density buildings in certain spaces, especially towards the outside of these transitions, or some unique buildings that fit the sort of profile that you're looking for. The point is by spreading out some of the buildings, you begin to decrease the overall density. And if we go back to the little diorama we started setting up earlier, you can start to see how each piece of this puzzle begins to come together to create an interesting looking downtown with plenty of depth. If I can part on one last tip, I would suggest just making sure you have some sort of plan for your city. As it evolves and grows, you want to factor these types of areas in, and it may just take time for you to get there. You may have to continually adapt those spaces before they become what they will eventually be. I hope this provides you with a little bit of inspiration for your next city. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe so you can keep up to date on all things related to city skylines.